Great. I have green light from Chiara so that we can start. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. I see the room is still populating, and it's a very good sign. I know that we have many registered participants for today. It's a pleasure for me to be here and introduce this online debate in which we will present the results, the main findings of an FSR study founded by the Foundation Naturgy, and which has been performed by FSR researchers. And we have here a few of them in the course of the last 1 year. It's been really a major effort, but we hope that the results, the way we will present them today, will be interesting to you and will also be able to raise some questions and stimulate a good debate for the second part of the event. In this regard, I would already like to invite you to use the Q&A chat, the Q&A box, so that you can already starting from minute 1 to write questions, and that will be answered by our speakers today. I will be moderating this debate, but I'm happy to introduce you to all our speakers today. We have Andries Piebalgs and Christopher Jones. They are both part-time professor at Florence School of Regulation, and Jean-Michel Glachan, the FSR director, the director of the Florence School of Regulation. Andries and Jean-Michel will have the floor in a minute for a brief introduction. Then Christopher Jones will guide us through the main findings of the study, which will be followed by a Q&A session of about 20 minutes. So I would like to now give the floor to Jean-Michel, and good luck for this discussion on hydrogen technologies. Jean-Michel.
Thank you, Ilaria. Ilaria is head of the gas area at Florence School. I'm the director, but never forget that I am a professor. The only thing interesting me on Earth is to produce knowledge and to share it. And I'm very pleased that this work is done. It has been a really hard work for 1 year. We produced 8 chapters, more than 200 pages, etc., etc. It's also an honor, because what is a school? In higher education, a school is where knowledge is created and shared, or reviewed and transmitted. And we are very pleased that Naturgy helped us to fund the study, because 1 year of work, we need money. But Naturgy let us do exactly what we want, exactly the way we work. It's a totally transparent result that you can read as the most independent possible way of studying the issue. I will not say more about the content, because Andries and Christopher were the active leaders of the work, and they will express it in a minute.
Well, from my side is definitely what we have had mostly in mind when we started it. It is a classical triangle of energy policies. So competitiveness, security of supply, and competitiveness. And if we see today's EU energy markets, we could definitely say, well, there have been a lot of achievements. We have latest data, and in 2019 there have been 24% less emissions in the EU compared with 1990. So it's very good advance, because the target was 20%. We have a competition. We have more price convergence inside the European Union. And for security of supply, there have been really serious things that have been achieved. But then you look retrospectively, saying what have been the costs? How much society has paid for it? And when we know the costs, then you say, well, if you continue in this direction, could you save costs or look on the costs slightly different? And I think that was the initial ideas, and look at the policies that we have done and look what consequences we would make. But when we moved forward, actually, the current trends influenced it, and the specifics of the study is more related to particular hydrogen, as Ilaria, so you immediately grasp this idea, then also renewable electricity, and also the third pillar is touch upon energy efficiency. And why these issues came in forefront? Because we know now very clearly the journey, well, one very important part of the journey, the 2050 EU energy mix should be carbon neutral. So we know also technology portfolio, what we have at this stage. So as a result, you look more profoundly in these directions and look what costs are related in this transition. And if for renewable electricity, there is quite a lot of experience, for hydrogen, definitely for renewable and low carbon hydrogen, there is less experience. And that's why I would say that the main interest from the people who already have seen the study is going only in this direction. But as I mentioned, it is broader. The study is definitely broader. It's never perfect. So again, the objectives of the study is to review the existing policies and better how to better could have cost efficiency been included, but also to give the evidence for policymakers to make an optimal triangle as we are moving forward. Because we are moving in the period where there will be a lot of political decisions, like one that everybody expects, the 2030 objective for greenhouse gas emissions will be 55% less compared with 1990. It's still not taken, but very few would doubt that that will be accepted in the EU. And when we look on the decarbonization scenarios and existing and a lot of very honorable institutions made, you find a serious gaps in technological portfolio, but also in approaches. You find the gaps that are not filled in. And that definitely gives even more importance for cost efficiency issues, because if you don't quite know the journey and you know some of the basic pillars of it, so that would make by far more cautious you how much money you put in particular stage and what scale of it. And there is no question that public money or taxpayers' money or consumers' money will be needed in the transition, because everybody will benefit by it. But you need to go it. And now they're running forward. What we come to the conclusions, well, it's not of something miracle solution. Well, technology neutral approach should be followed. That I think is very clearly that one of the conclusions is. And carbon costs should be internationalized, internalizing, because internalized for better reflect on main objective, carbon neutral energy mix by 2050. I would end before passing to Christopher the floor, saying that we very much profited in our discussions with two young researchers, Piero Carlo dos Reis and Golnish Soros. It was really enjoyable because none of them has dealt with 2020 package like Jean-Michel, Christopher, and myself. And that's very interesting to see that interaction with different generations, really to look why you did it, explaining, and then they made the conclusions also in the study in some ways. So it's very, very much appreciated. And now Christopher will introduce the study as he sees the main elements. But the whole study, I think, is close to 200 pages, so it's worth reading it.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to share my screen with some slides. Okay, is that correct, Ilaria? Okay, fine. So, this study it's enormously rich. As Andriy said, it's a couple hundred pages. And whilst we're going to focus on hydrogen today, the focus of the study is not just hydrogen. It was an effort to really ask the question, and I guess the question we asked ourselves was the following. The achievement of the Green Deal targets are, from our perspective, a given. They are the foundation of energy policy. And so on the basis of the assumption that the only alternative is the achievement of the Green Deal targets, what issues need to be taken account in order to do that in a cost-effective way? Because obviously this is important in order to achieve in a cost-effective way. And as I say, whilst we're going to focus on hydrogen, because in a way that's flavour of the month, I do commend the parts of the study on energy efficiency and renewable energy in particular, and I'm going to go through those quickly. So these are the four areas. So energy efficiency. Now, we all say energy efficiency first, don't we? Every time we say energy efficient first. And the first conclusion of this study was indeed energy efficiency first. Is the cheapest, most cost-effective, most job-creating way in which to decarbonize the European energy economy. And that is a given, but there's a lot of concern that we have here. So this is the distance to the 2020 energy efficiency target. Which member states are doing better, which member states are doing worse. Remember, this is 2020 target, okay? There's a hell of a lot of ink below the line there, and that's very worrying. And this is the 2020 target. This is not the 2030 target, which is way more ambitious, let alone the 2030 target that's going to have to happen with the Green Deal increased targets. And remember that the National Energy and Climate Plans, Commission's main criticism to member states are your energy efficiency target isn't robust enough. And even when it is robust, you haven't set out how you're going to achieve it. So, and if you look at energy consumption in the EU, energy consumption compared to GDP. So this is energy consumption on the vertical, this is GDP on the horizontal. What you see is that every year from 2008, basically, energy consumption went down along with the economic crisis. Since 2014, when things got better, not so good. So this is of real concern to us in terms of achieving the 2030 energy efficiency targets. So whilst hydrogen is indeed important, whilst it is indeed flavour of the month, first priority, energy efficiency, absolutely. Renewable energy sources, these are really important. So let me talk a little bit about the way that our researchers, Pierre and Golnosh, went about this. Because as Andries said, Andries, Jean-Michel and I, you always come into a study with preconceived ideas of what the result you think it's going to be. And so what we have tried to do is really to produce the most objective data possible in relation to renewable costs and in relation to future hydrogen costs, ETS switching costs required to get hydrogen in the market, and how much subsidies would be necessary to get hydrogen in the market. And so we asked Pierre and Golnosh to simply calculate these numbers on the basis of peer reviewing a very large selection of the most reliable sources. Notably, IRENA, International Energy Agency, Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and others, additional academic studies. And there's one thing that you see here. So these are the ranges of renewable electricity prices, future predictions, which are extremely encouraging, extremely encouraging. Just a couple of things. One thing you'll notice is the huge variation in terms of the predictions. And secondly, that utility scale PV in very sunny areas has the possibility to give the cheapest, absolutely the cheapest form of renewable electricity in the future, according to the data we have today. You'll notice this 11.2 euros per megawatt hour in Portugal, world record bid until today, and Bloomberg New Energy Finance down to 10 euros a megawatt hour. Okay, so in this respect, one of the conclusions that we came to in the report is as we scale up the amount of renewable electricity in the European market, which of course we have to do, renewable electricity will be the backbone of Europe's future energy system. We need to identify and prevent the emergence of bottlenecks for the increase in renewable electricity at cost-effective ways, in competitive ways, notably in terms of networks and notably in terms of balancing costs. There's quite a bit in the report on this. We don't have time today to go into considerable detail, but it's really worth looking at that and saying that in terms of priorities for EU energy policy, in terms of cost effectiveness, number one, energy efficiency. Number two, making sure that renewable electricity will be able to meet its potential in a cost-effective way and will not hit bottlenecks that frustrate this. Okay, so energy security was the third pillar, and what we did in particular was to look what had happened to EU gas countries that had a challenging energy security situation in 2002. Where we have the potential number of gas sources in 2012, and then had a look at the success of the European Commission's policy, the EU's policy, on the Connecting Europe facility in terms of the increase in contestability of national markets. And you see that there has been a great deal of success in this respect. And we score very highly the marks that the European Union has been doing in relation to energy security, in relation to gas supplies in the past. So given the limited time, I will now move to hydrogen. So going back to the approach that we have taken and the data that we have concluded, and that I will present to you today, I am going to be doing a surface skim of the data, because Pierre and Golnish and their data has been peer reviewed, and in particular, thank you to Ronnie Bellmans in Leuven for his assistance in this respect. So what I'm going to provide you is the average, or what you can try and call consensus, if you like that, data of expected hydrogen costs now, 2030 and 2050, of the different types of hydrogen, the expected ETS prices that would need to occur in order to get these different forms of hydrogen into the market, and finally, the level of subsidies that will be needed in order to ensure the wide-scale introduction of hydrogen into the market. Okay, so this is the first slide. And so what you have here are the average levelized costs of hydrogen expected of the different types of hydrogen today, 2030 and 2050, on the basis of the average consensus between all the different studies that we looked at. Again, in order to have a really full picture, you have to look at the differences or the range in this area. I will come back to this in a minute, which are very considerable. But by taking the average, it does give us a picture, a snapshot of where consensus findings expect different hydrogen costs to be on the basis of currently available technology or currently predictable technology, which is another important point. Okay, so first terminology, what types of hydrogen we're looking at. Utility scale PV, offshore wind, so two types of green hydrogen. Domestic blue hydrogen, so hydrogen produced by steam methane reforming, then using carbon capture and storage. And then turquoise hydrogen, otherwise known as pyrolysis, so using renewable electricity in order to split natural gas into hydrogen and carbon dioxide and pressuring the carbon dioxide into graphite, which can then be used as an industrial process or soil improvement. So there are potentials there. So direct greenhouse gas emissions, obviously for green hydrogen, 0. For domestic blue hydrogen, between 0.8 and 1.5 kilograms of carbon dioxide per kilogram of hydrogen. As I'm sure you know, blue hydrogen cannot capture all the CO2. And for pyrolysis, between 0 when renewable electricity is used to power the reaction, to 2.5 in the event that coal. An important point is this does not take account of fugitive methane emissions, which are an important element here. So with that taken, we have not put in 2 areas have not been filled. So turquoise hydrogen has not been filled the cost today because the technologies are not mature. We have not put blue hydrogen in 2050 because it is not a zero carbon source of hydrogen, and so therefore in principle does not have a role in 2050, unless you would be able to offset the CO2 emissions, but being as they're significant, that's unlikely. Okay, so there you see the different predicted levels, price of hydrogen today. So 3.45 for large-scale utility PV, 4.9 for offshore wind, and 1.7 for blue hydrogen today. So in 2030, this would give you 2.1 for utility scale PV, 2.6 for offshore wind, close to 2 for blue hydrogen, and 1.4 for turquoise. 2050, 1.4 for utility scale PV, 1.65 for domestic green hydrogen based on offshore wind, and 1.2 for pyrolysis. Now, some caveats, some observations. Number one, again, look at the range of predictions because these are average and not anything else. Number two, if you take domestic green hydrogen based on utility scale PV and you apply to that the lowest cost forecasts for PV utility scale, so equivalent to Portugal, Northern Africa, Australia, Chile, for example, you get down to much lower levels than I put here, because these are average. In fact, you get here, if you're using utility scale PV in Portugal at 10 euros a megawatt hour, you get to 0.9 euros a kilogram. The numbers are placed down here. And here you get to 0.5, okay? So in the event that you can produce green hydrogen from utility scale PV in very sunny areas, you have the potential to bring it in 2030 competitive with, or more than competitive with blue, competitive with turquoise, and here similarly. In relation to turquoise hydrogen, this is not a mature technology today. It is in large laboratory scale. The physics work, okay, but it requires upscaling in order to demonstrate these numbers are correct. Another issue is that turquoise hydrogen pyrolysis uses 25, the numbers that I have seen uses 25% of the renewable electricity to produce 1 kilo of hydrogen compared to electrolysis, because the amount of energy you need to split a natural gas molecule is much lower than an electricity molecule, sorry, a water molecule. So those are some of the numbers that you have there, which form the basis of the conclusions. One of the first conclusions we already bring here is huge level of uncertainty here. And I'll come back to this, huge level of uncertainty. These are the figures, the best figures that we can do today based on currently available information and currently predictable technology. But there are huge variations in the numbers as you've seen, okay? Now, this is a very complicated piece of information and I'm going to simplify it for you in a second. What we've asked our researchers is, taking those numbers, taking those hydrogen costs, what do we expect the ETS prices needed in order to get hydrogen into the market? Assume that you don't get any subsidies. There's no subsidies. There's no feed-in tariffs or tenders, contracts for difference. You just let the market sort it out. What ETS prices would you need in order to get hydrogen in the market? And so we've asked them, let's focus on this. There's two types of markets for hydrogen, okay? The first type of market is to get rid of the grey hydrogen we have today, which is used for feedstocks. So hydrogen is used as feedstocks, and that's 10 million tons today. And that is used in methanol production, in fertilizers, ammonia in particular. So that's one use. The other use you can use for hydrogen in the future is energy use. So it would replace natural gas. So we asked our researchers to split those two and say, first of all, okay, what are the ETS prices you need in order to get hydrogen into the feedstock market, the grey hydrogen market? And then next, what prices do you need in order to get it into the energy markets? They're completely different sectors, completely different markets. And as we will see, they're completely different numbers, okay? So the first thing we tried to look at is what sort of numbers do we need in 2030 in order to get this substitution? And so you have two columns here, okay? The one column is here, which is the grey hydrogen, oh, sorry. The grey hydrogen, sorry, I don't know what, I know what I've done. Excuse me, just 1 second. Okay. The first one is in relation to grey hydrogen, this column here. So this is the feedstock hydrogen. This is the energy. Okay? So we asked so first one is, what ETS prices do you need to get low and zero carbon hydrogen into the grey hydrogen market, the feedstock hydrogen market? And the answer is, the ETS prices are relatively limited. They're quite doable, actually. You get from, let's look at the average numbers first. You get between 75 and 150 for green hydrogen, based on utility scale PV, 135 to 225 for offshore wind, 55 to 145 for blue hydrogen, and 0 to 80 for pyrolysis, subject, of course, to it being developed by 2030. Now, if you take the lowest level PV prices, so we take the Portuguese 10 euros a megawatt hour bid and we apply it, the answer is for green hydrogen 0 to 10, and pyrolysis is 0 to 10. Okay. Now, and then we look at what about if you want to get it into natural gas? Okay. So you're going to use it as an energy source. You're not going to use it as a feedstock. Then the costs skyrocket. So the first thing you see is it's much cheaper to substitute hydrogen as a feedstock than it is to use it as an energy source, because then the numbers start becoming very unpalatable in 2030. So the average number for PV for it to replace natural gas, for example, in the production of cement, in the production of steel, so heating cement furnaces, steel furnaces, okay? 205 to 305 euros, we're talking average. For offshore wind, 275 to 375, 180 to 225 for blue hydrogen, and 95 to 200. So some conclusions there already, which is, well, it looks doable for substituting feedstock hydrogen. It looks a very expensive proposition to replace it as an energy source in the short term. Okay, so, okay, 2030, grey hydrogen feedstock kind of works, yeah. Different technologies, different prices. Using as an energy source, not so much. Okay, so what happens by 2050? By 2050, being as the expected costs of renewable based hydrogen has come down, the costs expected to get into both markets reduce as well. Okay, so this is feedstock hydrogen in 2050. Now, normally there won't be any feedstock hydrogen left by 2050 that is not low and replaced by either low and preferably zero carbon hydrogen by that stage. But nonetheless, the prices come down very quickly. What you see in relation to 2050, in relation to the use of hydrogen, So here we're only looking at zero carbon hydrogen. Okay, we've taken blue hydrogen out of the picture here because obviously it doesn't have a role in 2050. So there again, once you get to 2050, you see the ETS prices at the lower levels of these ranges. It's doable. It's doable because if we don't have ETS prices of 100 by 2050 in order to have a fully decarbonised energy market, then, well, it will be a miracle. Let's put it that way. And so that gives you some numbers. Now, you can see this on a graphic form. So these are the low and high levels, so of 2030 substitution of grey hydrogen. This is the ETS price. So if we assume the ETS price is, say, 50, okay, and we're taking average costs in 2030, then green hydrogen is going to be too expensive at 50 euros unless you're using utility scale PV. Offshore wind at the lowest level of minimum costs is compatible with 50 euros. Blue hydrogen is just about in the market at the low end of average costs and in the market at minimum costs. Pyrolysis is there, but again, the technology needs to be proven. 2050, if we assume that ETS prices for, this is for the energy use, and that follows the trend that I said earlier. And then I would like to come to the next question, which is, okay, so let's assume we do decide we are going to get rid of it. We are going to get rid of the grey feedstock hydrogen in 2030, and we are going to get rid of the energy hydrogen. Sorry, we are going to get low and zero carbon hydrogen into the energy market by 2030. What sort of subsidies would you need in order to do it? What sort of public subsidies would you need? And the answer in relation to grey hydrogen, these are average, again, these are average figures. So in relation to solar PV, it can go from 0 if we can get a lot of solar PV from sunny areas, okay? Up to 15 billion at the lowest level, and 0 to 5.9 using pyrolysis, 4 to 11 with blue, 12.4 to 20 in relation to grey hydrogen. In relation to substituting 10% of EU energy demand by green hydrogen, okay, the numbers get very high. So then you would need enormous level of subsidies, okay? So, what sort of conclusions do we draw from this? Now, so, first of all, in the way that we've done this study, we can identify, we can even reduce, but we can by no means eliminate the predictable uncertainties regarding the future pricing of low and zero carbon hydrogen, the ETS costs needed in order to get hydrogen into the market, low and zero carbon hydrogen into the market, and the subsidies that will be needed. Okay, we can reduce, but we can't eliminate the predictable uncertainties. But in a way, the magnitude of these uncertainties that remain despite all the very best efforts to take all of the available studies and to come up with some consensus figures, the magnitude of these uncertainties is in of itself one of the key findings of this study. Because to a large extent, if you look at the numbers that I've provided, there is the huge level of uncertainties. If you start trying to unpick the uncertainties in relation to the numbers that we've provided, and if you were going to say, yep, actually, utility scale PV is the right way to go, or pyrolysis is the right way to go, or blue hydrogen is the right way to go, the three of us, after having done this study, could unpick anybody's arguments saying that is the right way to go. Let's just list some of the uncertainties that are relevant in order to determine this, okay? To say that, okay, I know in 2030, what would be the price of blue, green, yellow, turquoise, whatever. You need to be able to predict the renewable electricity price, okay? As we've seen, the predictions regarding the future renewable electricity price the bands are enormous. You need to be able to predict the future hydrogen price, grey hydrogen price, which you're substituting. You need to be able to predict the future natural gas price, which is what you're going to be substituting. You need to be able to make some assumptions regarding the availability of renewable electricity, because renewable hydrogen requires a hell of a lot of renewable electricity. So we need to make some assumptions regarding the availability of renewable electricity along the time scale of the decarbonisation cycle. You need to make some assumptions on whether or not you will actually be able to do renewable hydrogen in really sunny places, because renewable hydrogen electrolysis uses a hell of a lot of water, and you need clean water. And so you can find the clean water two ways. You can, number one, you can take it from the water table. Now, sunny areas tend to have a problem of water scarcity. And if you're building an electrolysis plant with a 20 or 30 year amortization period, you're making assumptions on what climate change is going to do to water scarcity. Of course, one can desalinate, but that means the costs. Yorgo from Hydrogen Europe gave me the number, it would increase the cost by about 15%. But then the question is, what are you going to do with all the salt? So it requires you to make some assumptions there. In relation to pyrolysis, it requires you to make some assumptions regarding the speed of development of technology and future costings. It requires you to make some assumptions regarding the cost of transporting hydrogen from, for example, Morocco, if you wish to do it PV in a very sunny place and you've solved the water issue. And you need to make some assumptions regarding the reductions of capex costs of hydrogen in relation to the technology cycle. So with all these, what are some of the, I'm just going to make a few comments and then I'll pass to Andres and Jean-Michel for some additional thoughts. I would focus on the key conclusion, I think, which is the best way to enable this market to develop in a way that is a cost-effective one is using the principles of the internal energy market.
Christopher, sorry, do you think you will be able to?
I've got 1 minute.
Fantastic, thanks.
Is to use the principles of the internal energy market in order to ensure that the different forms of hydrogen that we have identified compete for hydrogen demand. So if you're going to do a tender, okay, a tender for hydrogen production, let the market decide, but it has to be based on a full well-to-wheel life cycle GHG guarantee of origin, so that you fully internalize, as Andrew said, the hydrogen content of the hydrogen you're buying. Then let the market decide. In a way, that will also solve the blue problem, the question of blue. Because if you let the market decide, and if you say one thing, very simple, which is ensure or guarantee that by 2050, the market for hydrogen will be a zero carbon market, then the investment cycle will determine itself when blue hydrogen goes out the market, which will probably be earlier than most people think, because you'll be very brave to build a blue hydrogen plant in 2035 if you expect to amortize it by 2050. So I think the main conclusions of the study is take a market-based approach to your hydrogen policy. It would take us a little more time to go into detail on all of the conclusions, which are summarized here, but I'll pass the floor back now to Andres and Jean-Michel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Jean-Michel and Andres, if you have any quick comment after Christopher's great presentation. Otherwise, I will prepare to pick up some questions from the box, from the Q&A box, and I will ask you to comment.
Well, it's a bit related to the questions from the box, because the methods that have been used, we did not really made our own assumptions on the cost factors. We looked on the well-established international studies that reflects on the issues, like International Energy Agency, IRENA, and what other sources you will find in the study. That is a main issue, because we don't try to speculate with figures on approaches. And it's also true that different sources give different assumption, like on VACC assumption references. Only International Energy Agency explicit this assumption. They say 8% of real interest rate. Others don't do this. It's true that it is some deficiency, but by overall level of uncertainty, you need to address sooner or later this, but not perhaps at this stage. Then another factor that I would like to mention, we'll try to find the consensus prices. So you could always argue that, well, if you don't know what everybody puts in the box, how it could be consensus? Well, our researchers look from all aspects and really try to build the most coherent approach. It's not perfect approach, but for presentation, it's good that you have one figure, not interval, because on the ETS, you see this bright interval, you look down or up. So it's more correct, perhaps, approach, but we tried specially for illustration to come to this consensus figure, because that gives better understanding of the challenge and the costs that it involves.
Thank you. Jean-Michel?
The job of the researchers is not here to make predictions and forecasts. It's totally the opposite. It's to take respected references and to understand how they produce their predictions, their forecasts. And this is the job of the researchers. Because you have so many technologies on the table. Huh? You have solar PV, solar utility scale, onshore, offshore, three way of having clean hydrogen. And for each one, you have tricks in the reasoning or normal assumptions, but they are not making the same. Even people respected in respected institutions are not making the same assumptions. And sometimes the assumptions they make for this particular technology is really bizarre or counterintuitive. That's our job. And then you have seen the job of Andres and Christopher is the opposite one, is a policy consequences, policy implications. Usually researchers are doing the research and the policy implication. Sometimes it's a joke because many researchers are good at research, but have never produced any real policy. And how do we produce a policy? This Andres knows. He has been 10 years commissioner at European Commission and minister in his country. And Christopher also knows he has been quasi 15 years member of the cabinet of a commissioner and deputy director general for energy. They know policy making. We know research on costs, and we know also technologies because our two researchers are engineers. So we covered it all, and I guess what we made is of value, but I would like now to jump into the Q&A because power to the people.
Thank you, Jean-Michel. Yes, and I must say it's really true. I mean, Christopher went into the details of the study and in the main findings in a very clear and perfect manner. I wanted to say that, you know, also having the chance of talking to Golnush and Piero, who worked for so long on this study, I must say that I should actually congratulate to them, because when they started working at this looked really like a mission impossible, I must say, 1 year ago. The strategy, the hydrogen strategy of the Commission, the energy system integration strategy, had not been published yet. So they had to really deal and dig in depth on many studies that were published back then. So, you know, and we know that these data are always in progress because technology advances, etc. So really a great work. Yes, let's go. Let's take a look to the questions. They are quite technical, I must say. So in case Piero is, I see Piero is connected, so he is also welcome to contribute to the discussion and to help with answering these questions, as he's really the one looking into the numbers. But in principles, there are questions concerning which type of WACC has been used to calculate that prices, and this is something Andres already mentioned. So if it was the marginal cost, or if you are assuming a determined return to investors. Andres has already quickly touched on this, and I think it really depends on the type of data used, so which were the publications. So this was actually a choice in the first place done by the publishers of the other studies that researchers here compared. Any comment on this? Maybe Christopher?
No, you should ask Piero, because
it's
then
quite
we
detailed.
are entering into the sub-details for each technology. We have up to 10 factors contributing to the cost for each of the 7. So we are up to 70 factors now. So if Piero wants to give this very precise technical update, welcome.
And his baby also available also later on to be contacted if you have any specific questions or curiosities about the methodology and the numbers used. So this is always appreciated. Let's see. So maybe a less technical question is from Marco La Cognata regards the costs for RES. The production cost has been considered. However, as electricity systems work under system marginal price approach, there could be an opportunity cost for electricity produced by renewable energy. For example, a PV plant might prefer selling electricity on the electricity market instead of using it for producing hydrogen. In that case, wouldn't the electricity price for power to gas be the market electricity price?
Shall I have a go at that
Christopher? One? Sure, please.
The answer is, of course, yes. And this is probably another of the uncertainties that I mentioned, because, yeah, that's a good example. So let's assume that we can manage to use renewable electricity from Portugal at 10 euros a megawatt hour. And then we desalinate the water, whatever. So you provide it relatively cheaply. But as you say, obviously, it's not infinitely scalable. You can't cover the whole of Portugal and Spain by PV panels. And if you're building PV panels and you've got the choice between selling your electricity to a hydrogen plant at 10 euros a megawatt hour or putting it into the pool price at 40 euros a megawatt hour, you know exactly what you're going to do. So this just, I think, reinforces the reflection that I made earlier, that there are so many uncertainties regarding the future costs of hydrogen, how the market is going to develop, that really the important thing is to have a market that enables the market to determine it rather than political decisions. If political decisions determine it, it's the wrong way. Perhaps I can just add one additional conclusion that we drew, but I think you've probably already done it yourself, which is that if it is true, the numbers that we have, that substituting grey hydrogen, so feedstock hydrogen, by clean hydrogen, is within the scope, the area of the ETS prices we would expect by 2030, then it makes sense to have a policy of focusing on getting rid of that before you use it as an energy source. And so there's a temporal aspect to this, which is first get rid of the feedstock hydrogen, and then get rid of, and then put it into the energy system. The second thing that we also concluded in this, or raised the question for policymakers, which is that the renewable market, in 2009, the EU started putting massive renewable subsidies, production subsidies, massive production subsidies. According to Commission figures, we ended up spending 70 billion euros a year in production subsidies, so feed-in tariffs and tenders. Now, that makes, I would defend that makes sense in relation to renewables, even if hypothetically it might have made more sense to say, okay, let's invest in research and development for the first 5 years and only give production subsidies once you get the cost down. Now, the reason why it made sense to do that in renewables is because most of the economies came not from technology, although that was very important, certainly in relation to wind, but in economies of scale of manufacturing. Because you need hundreds of millions of PV panels. Not true in relation to hydrogen. You will not need million hydrogen electrolysis, pyrolysis, carbon capture and storage, steam methane reforming. You might need thousands, hundreds, thousands. In which case, there's a much stronger argument for saying between now and 2025, invest massively in research and development and demonstration plans to get the cost of CapEx, and then invest in CFDs and tenders to get rid of the feedstock grey hydrogen. Thank you. Sorry, I just forgot to say that in the conclusions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Chris. I think we have maybe time for one more quick question, but it's I think it will be quite easy for you to answer. Is a carbon border adjustment to avoid offshoring of industry explored in this study, or will it be maybe explored later on? It's a very topical question.
We would have been happy to explore, but not in this study. It's far too much. But I do agree that it's a perfect complementary measure. And maybe you have seen that the French Ministry for Industry Environment is thinking that we might, with the President Biden, we might have a window of opportunity to get an international agreement on it and to be able to resist the push of the Chinese to not have an agreement. But I'm not a policymaker, so Andres and Christopher can view it totally different from me.
Andres.
No, we have not gone in this carbon border adjustment. We really we are thinking for the next year to look on these factors, because we tried really to focus on this cost efficiency elements. For next year, we would like, there will be more certainty about this 55% target. And then the issue is for policymakers, how they will address through ETS mostly, or effort sharing regulation. And that matters. That really matters. Definitely ETS window seems better in this respect. And then definitely carbon border adjustment comes in, because if you expose energy intensive industry to full carbon price, then you need to think about it. So that's inevitable. We need to reflect on it, but at this study we didn't do this.
Okay, thanks. Chris, is there anything you want to add to conclude? And then I'll give the floor to Jean-Michel for the conclusions.
Adjustment. Yeah, no, it's going to be terrifically complicated because, you know, it seems to make sense that, okay, we'll bring the steel industry under the ETS, so steel prices go from 100 to 110. So therefore, we stick a border tax of €10 on imported steel. So problem is solved. Well, not so much, because European steel then costs 110 and American steel costs 100, which means that our cars are more expensive. So it's going to be a terrifically difficult issue to solve. But I think what it does show is the importance of having really effective guarantees of origin, because this is going to apply to imported hydrogen. Because a hydrogen molecule, like an electron's an electron, doesn't have colors. And so you're going to have to be, we're going to price hydrogen. So if you do that, you have to make sure that your imported hydrogen is indeed guaranteed. It's guaranteed in one way or the other. So although the CBAM isn't going to be directly related to hydrogen, it will be related, because you're going to have to put a tax on imported hydrogen if it's not zero carbon or low carbon, in one way or another.
Clear. Okay. Thank you very much, Christopher. So this said, I think we can conclude here this Q&A session. And before I give the floor to Jean-Michel for the final conclusion, I would just like to remind you that this study is published. I share the link to the entire publication in the chat box. So you will find it there. I want to thank also Piero for answering some of the more technical questions in the chat box, and he also shared his email address. So please don't hesitate to get in touch with us if you're interested in the content of this study. Congratulations to all the authors of this very important study. You've seen that I focused on hydrogen because that's the thing that sticks the most in my mind, and also, well, it is the topical issue right now, hydrogen, and I think this study brings really some important food for thoughts and interesting results to bring the discussion forward. So thank you very much to all the authors and speakers today, and I give the floor to Jean-Michel for conclusions.
Yeah, what is really important to know and to understand about this study is that it's a total exception in research life. Tradition for researchers. I am researcher since decades. I'm director of research. I've been a chief editor of an academic journal. I'm vice president of the International Association for Energy Economics. So I know what I'm telling about. Tradition with academic researchers is that they do their research in their lab or in the library, depending if they are more engineers or more economists. And they draw policy recommendations. It comes from their mind. They know what they have to, the governments have to do. That's the tradition. And the symmetric tradition for governments is to do what they think the best policy for the governments, and to add some cherries on the cake. And even Christopher was saying one day with a smile, looking for facts confirming the policy. We did the opposite. Researchers do their research. I am an economist. We took two young engineers, understanding economics also, but two young engineers to understand the engineering of it, the engineering part. We took many advices from Ronnie Bellman, because we know Ronnie from 16 years and we have a big respect for his enormous engineering knowledge. And interacting continuously with two outstanding policymakers, Andris and Christopher. I'm sorry to repeat it, but they made the third energy package. Come back 11 years ago and remember how difficult it has been to get this energy package, how effective it has been. Huh? We have the market open for electricity and gas. We have the network codes. All of this works. We have FSR. So we did it together young researchers working like animals. You know what is a young researcher? Old crab in energy economics, me, and two policymakers. That's what we did. And we do not oblige you to think like us. We do not tell you what to think. We tell you what is interesting to know about the weaknesses or the strengths of the analysis of IEA, IRENA, Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and some other, sometimes JRC and European Commission itself, or academic researchers. We tell you what is strong, what is weak, and then you can make your mind regarding the core of the research. And then you have the policy making, and you can look at the policy recommendations. You can agree, you can disagree. It's entirely up to you. What is key to remember is that our goal, the five of us, is to guarantee that the Green Deal will be made. To guarantee it, there is policy conditions. Commission is giving them and European countries are supporting. We have economic conditions, cost effectiveness. We have social conditions. It has to be affordable. It has to deliver jobs. It has to guarantee the technological leadership of Europe. Then you know what is our goal. You have the research, you make your mind, and that's happy life for everyone and Christmas for everybody.
Thank you very much all the speakers.